Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is April 15th. Today's story takes us more than a century into the past to 1920, when a bold daylight robbery in South Braintree, Massachusetts left 2 men dead and lit the fuse on what would become one of the most controversial and politically charged trials in American history. This wasn't just a crime, this was a moment that captured the country's deepest fears about immigration, radicalism, and fairness in the justice system. And over a century later, it's still sparking debate. Today, we're revisiting the South Braintree payroll robbery and the lasting legacy of Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti. Let's get started. It was just after 3 p.m. on April 15, 1920, when Frederick Parmenter, the paymaster at Slater & Morrill Shoe Company, and Alessandro Berardelli, the company's guard, left the company office carrying the factory payroll, $15,776.51, all in cash, which today would be around $250,000. Their destination was just 200 yards away. But they never made it. As they walked down Pearl Street, they were ambushed. 2 gunmen stepped out and opened fire. Berardelli was shot 4 times. Parmenter was shot twice. Witnesses said the attackers grabbed the payroll bag and fired what seemed to be a signal shot. Seconds later, a dark-colored Buick appeared. The shooters jumped in and the car took off, throwing nails down in the street behind them to slow down anyone who might give chase. The getaway car vanished around the corner, and just like that, the attackers were gone. Berardelli died at the scene. Parmenter passed away the next morning, and the money was never recovered. The robbery and double homicides set off a frantic investigation. At a time when fears of anarchist bombings and radical uprisings were running high, the political pressure to find the culprits was enormous. Police located the abandoned getaway car in the woods near Bridgewater, Massachusetts. Inside, they found a few telling items: a cap, a .32 caliber bullet casing, and what they believed were clues linking the car to local anarchists, particularly a group of Italian immigrants known to hold anti-government views. Soon, attention turned to 2 men, Nicola Sacco, a shoemaker, and Bartolomeo Vanzetti, a fish peddler. Both were Italian immigrants, and both were openly anarchist in their beliefs. On May 5, 1920, police arrested them in Brockton, claiming that they were trying to retrieve a car that had been linked to the investigation. At the time of their arrest, Sacco was carrying a .32 Colt automatic pistol, the same type used in the shooting. Vanzetti had a revolver. Both were also carrying anarchist literature. The 2 men gave conflicting alibis and were reportedly evasive in their responses, which only fueled suspicion. To law enforcement, it all seemed to line up. The guns, the political beliefs, the immigrant status, to them, it was enough to move forward. Sacco and Vanzetti were charged with the murders of Parmenter and Berardelli, and within weeks, the case had become a national lightning rod. The trial began on May 31st, 1921 in Dedham, Massachusetts. From the start, it was clear that this wasn't just about a robbery. It was about who these 2 men were and what they represented in a deeply divided America. Presiding over the case was Judge Webster Thayer, who was known for his anti-radical views. He'd already made his feelings clear in private, once reportedly calling Sacco and Vanzetti, quote, "those anarchist bastards," end quote. He also referred to them as Bolsheviki, a derogatory term at the time that associated them with communist revolutionaries. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Frederick Katzman, leaned heavily on ballistics and circumstantial evidence. A bullet taken from Berardelli's body was said to match Sacco's gun, though the science behind that claim would later be widely questioned. Several eyewitnesses placed the men near the scene, but their stories were often inconsistent, vague, or contradictory. Some later even recanted. The defense, led by attorney Fred Moore, tried to show that the men were being judged more for their beliefs and background than for any clear connection to the crime. He presented alibi witnesses. Sacco said he was in Boston getting passport papers, and Vanzetti said that he was selling fish. But their witnesses were treated with deep skepticism, likely in part because many were Italian immigrants who spoke through interpreters. Behind the scenes, Moore accused Judge Thayer of clear bias. He filed motions for a mistrial, citing the judge's inflammatory remarks and conduct, but those motions were denied. After 7 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for just 5 hours. On July 14, 1921, Sacco and Vanzetti were found guilty of first-degree murder. The verdict sparked outrage not just in Massachusetts, but all around the world. Protests erupted in different cities, and thousands believed that the case was politically motivated. They believed that Sacco and Vanzetti were victims of a justice system that was poisoned by xenophobia. Over the next 6 years, their legal team filed numerous appeals, and new information continued to surface. In 1925, a man named Celestino Medeiros, already on death row for another crime, confessed to taking part in the South Braintree robbery. He said the Morelli gang, a known crime syndicate, had committed the murders, not Sacco and Vanzetti. But Judge Thayer refused to consider this confession to be credible, and the court again denied a retrial. But public pressure only grew. Albert Einstein, George Bernard Shaw, H.G. Wells, and even future Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter, who was then a Harvard law professor, all spoke out against the verdict. Frankfurter wrote a scathing legal analysis, arguing that the trial was deeply flawed and shaped by prejudice. In a last-ditch effort to stop the executions, Governor Alvin Fuller created a special commission to review the case. But the three-man panel, led by Harvard President A. Lawrence Lowell, ultimately upheld the convictions. On August 23, 1927, Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti were executed via electric chair at Charlestown State Prison. The night before, vigils were held across the globe. In Boston, 20,000 people gathered in silence. Newspapers ran black borders in mourning. For many, this was more than a death sentence, it was a national shame. Over the decades, the stories of Sacco and Vanzetti became a symbol of injustice. Songs, books, plays, and films have all told their story, not just as a courtroom drama, but as a reflection of a moment in history when fear and intolerance overshadowed justice. Then, in 1977, on the 50th anniversary of their execution, Massachusetts Governor Michael Dukakis issued a proclamation acknowledging what so many had believed all along, that Sacco and Vanzetti were unfairly tried. He said in part, quote, "Any stigma and disgrace should be forever removed from the names of Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti. Their trial and execution should forever be a reminder of the damage that fear, prejudice, and intolerance can do to the cause of justice." End quote. The South Braintree payroll robbery was in many ways just one crime on one day in American history. But what followed? The arrests, the trial, the protests, and the executions turned it into something much bigger. A lens into the deep anxieties of a divided nation. A cautionary tale about justice and how quickly the scales can tip when fear takes the lead. And more than 100 years later, we're still talking about it, and some may say that in some respects, we're still living it. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It'll help us grow. And be sure to join me again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!